Self-hatred is an underlying feeling that we aren't good enough and worthy of unconditional love. This causes us to be in a constant state of comparison, which pulls us into this downward spiral of negativity and self-abuse. In this podcast, we will explore where self-loathing comes from and practices to help you transcend this dark imprisonment. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. Make sure that you press subscribe and to click on the link to get 3 amazing classes, power yoga, yin yoga, and meditation to increase that strength, flexibility, and calm. All right, let's jump into the video. Welcome to Dealing with Self-Hatred, episode number 78 of the Be Ultimate podcast. This is your host, Travis Elliott. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you as well for subscribing to the podcast, rating, reviewing, dropping a comment. Greatly, greatly appreciated. This week's podcast was inspired by an email that I received from a student that was inquiring about how to handle self-hatred. And we know that self-hatred is an issue that many millions of people on this planet face and deal with. So I want to dive into what self-hatred is. I want to share some stories, some insights, and some wisdom to give you practical tools and takeaways, whether it's yourself or a loved one that you know that is struggling with this, so that you can alleviate yourself from this darkness that can often feel unescapable. You can feel like you're trapped, that you're a prisoner to this. And in many severe cases, we know that this can lead to suicide. So it's my hope that you receive the light of wisdom that comes not from me, but really from the great ancient teachings of yoga and mindfulness, and we now see in modern day psychology. So what is self-hatred? Well, self-hatred is often described as a constant underlying feeling that we aren't good, that we're not good enough, and that who we are really matters, that we're lacking a purpose, and that we're really leading this meaningless life. Sometimes these feelings can be subtle. So it's like a very underlying frequency that's just very subtly in the background of our mind. And other times it can be brutally obvious. And of course, very often it goes back and forth between the two. Some days it's more subtle and we barely notice it. And other days it's like this blaring, horrible voice inside of our head that just will not quiet down. We often find that when we suffer from self-hatred is we compare ourselves to other people all the time. We often feel like we're not good enough. So we're always looking at, oh, that person over there has this or has that or looks like this, and we don't. So we feel like we're in this state of emptiness, like we're lacking and we're missing the joy and the health and the power and the happiness that we often think that others feel. Of course, when we throw in the whole social media element into this conversation, this exacerbates this issue even more, because most of the time people on social media are only posting their peak moments. They're only posting the pictures that are the best of the best. They may have taken 50 pictures to get that one shot, that one angle where they look amazing and they look beautiful. And so we're often comparing ourselves against something that is not even real. It's just a big illusion. As President Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy, and we hear a lot of that also from the great researcher on vulnerability, Brene Brown. Very often when we feel these emotions of self-hatred, it's also bundled with a constellation of other things. We might feel shame or guilt or depression, negativity, toxicity. So it all comes in like this big package, like a tidal wave of negative emotions. Also within self-hatred, we feel overrun by what's called the inner critic. And the inner critic is that voice inside of the head that scolds us. It berates us. It puts us down all the time. It beats us down. It abuses us through its negativity. It tells us how worthless we are. And it's this negative loop just going on over and over and over again. And this can cause us to move through life. Very often, you can see this within physical behavior where the head is hanging low, the chest and the heart is sunken. Or sometimes we actually see the opposite effect, where people puff their chest out and they put on this false sense of bravado that they are the most perfect human being to ever walk the face of the earth. But deep down inside, they know that they are miserable. They know that they are living a lie. They know that they are living a complete illusion. If you can relate to any of this, you're definitely not alone. So that's one of the biggest things when we talk about self-hatred, is that we often feel like we're the only person suffering from this. But the reality is that being a human being is often very challenging. It's very difficult. And it's what the Buddha called the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. So on some level, we all share this capacity of being able to hold the rising and the falling of emotions that oscillate and vacillate on a day-to-day basis. Now, in Western society, we are often plagued with self-hatred way more than some of the older Eastern traditions. In too many cases, this self-hatred can lead to severe depression and even suicide. There's a story that my meditation teacher, Jack Kornfield, talks about when him and many other teachers met with the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama comes to visit, and these Western teachers have an opportunity to ask the Dalai Lama some questions. And one of the main questions that they wanted advice and insight on dealing with was this widespread plague of self-hatred and unworthiness that was pervading Western civilization. And it took some time for the Dalai Lama to have this question translated. So he's going back and forth between him and the translator, because in Tibet, there's actually no word for self-hatred. It doesn't even exist. And the Dalai Lama, completely perplexed, asked the teachers in the room, he said, how many of you are dealing with this? And almost every teacher shot their hand up. And the Dalai Lama exclaimed, but this is a mistake. So again, and this is an issue that exists very prevalently in our modern day society, which shows you that a lot of the constructs that we created in our society are leading to our own suffering. So in the West, we often are infatuated with things of the ego. And one person said that ego stands for edging God out. Or we could look at it as edging happiness or edging joy out. The more that we get enslaved and dominated by our ego, the more suffering that we experience. So we're dominated very often by ego and vanity, materialism, physical stuff that's fed to us from since the days that we were born through advertising and marketing that's telling us that we need this thing in order to be enough, to be worthy. And if we don't have this thing, or we don't look this certain way, or our skin isn't completely clear like the model on the commercial, that we are lacking, that we're not meeting the bar of what people like. And then we also get these programs from family, community members, coaches, especially when we are children. Any trauma, any abuse that we experience as a child is a program that is installed within the circuitry of our brain. And very often this plays itself out through the decades of our life, where we go on, because of the way that we are treated when we are children, to not feel that we're worthy. And so therefore we have disdain for ourselves, especially if we had somebody in our life that berated us, that scolded us, that criticized us, that judged us all the time. Naturally, unless we deal with that trauma through therapy and through some tools that I'm going to share with you, then that continues to play itself out for the rest of our life. Before the age of 6, we are in this state within our brain where we literally soak up everything that's dropped into our brain. So we're very, very vulnerable. If you're a parent, or you have you're a teacher, or you have any children in your life beneath the age of 6, you want to do your best to very mindfully plant these really powerful, uplifting, benevolent seeds within the brains of those children under the age of 6. Now, I want to share with you something from Dr. Lisa Firestone and Joyce Catlett from their book, Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice. They write, "The nature and degree of this division within ourselves depends on the parenting we received and the early environment we experienced. Parents, like all of us, have mixed feelings toward themselves. They have things they like about themselves, and they have self-critical thoughts and feelings. The same negative feelings that parents have toward themselves are unfortunately often directed toward their children as well. In addition, if a parent has unresolved feelings from either trauma or loss in his or her past, this will impact his or her reactions to his or her children. Because of their acute sensitivity to pain and negative circumstances, children of all ages pay particular attention to and are more affected by even small incidences of parental anger. They may experience a parent's anger, whether acted out or not, as being life-threatening. Under extreme circumstances, they may be accurate in their perceptions. In any case, children in stressful situations often feel threatened to the core of their being and frightened for their lives. During times of stress, when children are afraid, they stop identifying with themselves as the helpless child and instead identify with the verbally or physically punishing parent. The parent is assimilated or taken in as he or she is at that moment, when he or she is at his or her worst, not as he or she is every day. The child tends to take on the anger, fear, self-hatred. In fact, the whole complex of emotions the parent is experiencing at that time. So I wanted to share that passage with you because it goes to show that if you are experiencing self-hatred in your life, very often it's not because of anything that you did wrong. It came from a parent, or it came from somebody that was in your life that acted in a way that installed these programs inside of your brain. So when we begin to recognize that and to become aware of that, very often that begins to give us a little bit of peace, because we recognize, oh man, there's actually nothing wrong with me. I'm not doing this the wrong way. This isn't even my fault. I was a victim to something that was passed down from my parents, which was probably passed down from their parents and their parents. So this is very important, if we are now parents, that we deal with our own traumas so that we break the cycle of passing down this trauma from one generation to the next. So these programs get installed at an early age, and then they get reinforced through repetition until the program starts running us instead of us running the program. So it's a discussion on no longer being the victim, but now being the one who is empowered to create the programs that we want to live and the programs that are in alignment with who we want to be. So the way that it works is we have a thought, and your thought sends a signal out, and then that signal produces an emotion or a feeling within the body. So if I was to say, where do you feel safe hatred in your body, and you quieted your mind down and you attuned yourself in, you may feel it in your chest, in your heart. This is why people often that suffer from self-hatred walk around with a collapsed heart. Or you may feel it in your gut. Very often these thoughts will arise and manifest within our physical body. So the thought sends a signal out, the emotion is then produced, and then the brain is monitoring the emotion that's experienced, and what it does is it sends out more chemistry, more thoughts to support the emotion. So now we're in this negative cycle, this negative loop, where the thought creates the feeling, the emotion, and the emotion creates a thought, and then that just runs itself over and over and over, wiring the neural nets in our brain until we create this pattern that's called our state of being. And so now we have this state of being that is the victim. We have the thoughts that says, I'm not good enough, I suck, I'm worthless, I'll never amount to anything. And then we feel that emotion of self-hatred, and then we produce more of those thoughts. And now we have this state of being where we're just swimming in this all the time. And we're not going to be attracting positive, uplifting people, things, experiences into our life, because our state of being is a magnet. It's an electromagnetic signature sending a frequency out to the field, and then we're drawing those events and those people into our life. So very often when we are wired to have self-hatred in our state of being, we end up in very unhealthy relationships. We end up in accidents, very often car accidents, or when two people with pain bodies collide with each other. There's a lot of drama and there's a lot of chaos going on in our world. So these get reinforced, these programs, by the stories that we tell. And we tell these stories inside of ourselves over and over until we get dominated by that voice of destruction. This is the inner critic. And that inner critic is the voice that judges, criticizes, and it just goes on, creating suffering and pain. There are two types of pain. One pain is the pain that's created in the present moment. The second type of pain is the pain from the past that keeps getting perpetuated over and over and over again. Hatred is a form of pain. And this hatred, it feeds what we call the pain body. The pain body is the stories and the reruns and the trauma and the unfinished business of the heart that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't healed, that we haven't processed. And we carry that with us into the present moment, and that's called the pain body. The pain body needs fuel to survive. So this fuel comes from complaining, blaming, negative emotions, and if it doesn't have that, then it begins to starve. See, there's a law in the universe that says the things that you feed become stronger. The things that you starve become weaker. There's a fantastic story in the Native American tradition that talks about a grandfather sitting around a campfire one evening with his 2 grandkids. And he's telling them this dramatic story of these 2 wolves that are in a really intense fight with each other. He explains that one wolf is reflective of the soul, compassion, kindness, goodness, forgiveness. But the other wolf is reflective of the ego, and this symbolizes hatred, judgment, criticism, resentment. And the grandkids, they ask their grandfather, which wolf wins the battle? And the grandfather replies, the one that you feed the most. You see, as human beings, we all, on some level, have a good wolf within us, and we have a bad wolf within us. But the beautiful thing, the empowered thing is you get to choose which wolf you're going to feed. And the idea is that we want to feed the good wolf so much that the good wolf is way stronger than the bad wolf, and the bad wolf may never go away. Maybe even as it gets depleted and weakened, it may be lurking around, trying to scavenge, trying to sneak itself back in, sometimes being sly, sometimes being devious. But anytime push comes to shove, the good wolf is there to take down the bad wolf. But it's like a muscle, and this muscle needs to be strengthened and reinforced over and over and over again. So it makes sense then, if we want to rise out of our pain body or self-hatred into happiness and joy, we need to stop fueling the pain body. The Buddha said, when greed, hatred, and delusion are given up, we no longer cause sorrow for ourselves or others. So how do we stop feeding this pain body? How do we no longer cause suffering for ourselves and for others? One of the most powerful, effective research ways to do this is by bringing kindness and compassion to ourselves. So I would ask you, how would you treat a vulnerable child? A child that was suffering, a child that was hurting, a child that was in pain, a child that, like you, felt self-hatred. You see, this child, it exists. And it exists inside of you. It's called the inner child. And this inner child needs to be honored. This child needs to be listened to. This child needs to be respected. And most importantly, this child needs to be loved. When that inner critic is firing off day in, day out, over and over and over again, inflicting its abuse, you're just abusing your own inner child. Now, I want to share a story with you from Jack Kornfield's book called The Wise Heart. Philippa, a Buddhist hospice nurse, told me a story from the county hospital where she worked. A patient she was helping to care for had been brought to the hospital under guard from the local prison. Bill was 44 years old, serving a long sentence for armed robbery and dying from complications of HIV and hepatitis C. He had not wanted his mother to visit because he was so ashamed of his life. But Philippa saw beneath this shame. After a heartfelt conversation, she convinced him to make contact with his mother. Several days later, his mother arrived, frail, over 80, with a grief-stricken expression. When Bill's mother entered the room, she saw her son, who had not spoken to her for years, in prison garb, handcuffed to the bed. Philippa was afraid that the dignified and stern mother would look at her son with judgment and disappointment. Instead, she just stood there with a deep stillness, and they looked each other all over. Then their eyes locked, and the circumstances and sufferings, the roles and costumes all dropped away. Philippa said that Bill's mother gazed at her son like a newborn child, like a saint witnessing a miracle with the heart of all mothers. Bill and his mother each saw their original goodness, forgiving, eternal. They sat together for an hour and held hands. There was not much that needed to be said. When his mother left, Bill said now he could die in peace. So no matter what the pains of the past that we carry, just like Bill's mother, we need to meet ourselves. We need to meet this child. And we need to meet them with compassion, with kindness, with respect. As the famous Indian guru sage Neem Karoli Baba says, love is the strongest medicine. This medicine needs to be directed to ourselves. Persian poet Hafiz says, I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your own being. You see, within all of us, no matter how depressed we are, no matter how stricken by self-hatred we are, no matter how imprisoned within that constant, unending cloud of darkness we are, there is a light. And this light is sometimes described as original goodness. And this original goodness is where our power resides. We've just been disconnected from it. So we can practice by placing a hand on the heart or somewhere on the body where it feels loving, and we can offer the phrases, I am worthy of love. I am worthy of love. I am worthy of love. Or another good phrase is, I hold myself in compassion. I hold myself in compassion. And very often in the beginning, it may not feel like that's what you're experiencing. You may not really feel worthy of love, but sometimes you have to fake it till you make it in the beginning. Remember the metaphor of feeding the good wolf and the bad wolf? It's going to take some time for that good wolf who hasn't been fed in a long time to get stronger, to get the nutrition. And through that repetition, making it a daily, repetitive, consistent practice, over time, that good wolf will get stronger and stronger. And then before you know it, you're saying the phrases, and you're also really authentically beginning to experience it. So I say that to you because if in the beginning it doesn't feel authentic and honest to you, that's actually pretty normal. So don't give up. Stay with it and just keep repeating, I am worthy of love. I am worthy of love. I am worthy of love. Another great meditation that you can do is the loving kindness meditation, sometimes known as metta meditation. And this is where we also work with phrases, and we direct these phrases of loving kindness to somebody in our life that is suffering. We also direct it to ourselves because the circle of compassion is not complete unless it includes ourselves. And then we often direct it to all life everywhere. So I've recorded this podcast. You can find it. It's episode number 19, the Loving Kindness Meditation. You can find it anywhere my podcast is available, or also on YouTube. Now, another thing that I wanted to explore here with self-hatred is the importance of becoming aware of your thoughts. We talked about how your thoughts create an emotion, and then the emotion creates more of the same thinking. Same thinking creates the same emotion, so we are in that same loop. Descartes famously said centuries ago, I think, therefore I am. And unfortunately, this is a completely inaccurate statement because it's also dangerous. If we identify with every thought that happens within our mind and we think that we are those thoughts, we are in big trouble because a lot of our thoughts don't have our best interest at heart. So this thought of self-hatred, you can look at it as a bad visitor arising to the home of your mind. But you don't have to let the bad visitor stay. You don't even have to let them in through the door. You don't have to answer the door. So in the same way that these thoughts, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I suck, I'll never amount to anything, or whatever that thought is, it may be there, but you don't have to identify with it. So the accurate phrase would be, I think, but I'm not always my thought. And I get to choose my thoughts. You see, 90% of your thoughts you've already thought before. So these thoughts are in constant feedback, just looping themselves, rerunning over and over and over again. So we have to turn on the light of awareness to become aware of the whole gamut of our thoughts. We want to become aware and awake to our unconscious thinking patterns so that we can start to disentangle, especially with those negative, destructive thoughts of self-hatred. St. Paul said, everything is shown up by being exposed to the light. And whatever is exposed to the light itself becomes the light. This is what enlightenment's all about. It's the light of becoming aware of that which is unconscious, becoming aware of those programs that were installed in you when you were a child because you were surrounded by an abusive parent or an abusive partner. And now we become free, we become liberated because we realize we aren't those thoughts. I don't have to believe those thoughts. And I get to choose which thoughts I'm going to engage with. So I'm going to come back to that thought. I am supported by loving awareness. I am worthy. I am enough. I am good enough. Whatever the thought is that resonates with you. Zen Master Ajahn Chah put it like this. When we choose a fruit to eat, do we pick up the good mangoes or the rotten ones? It is the same in the mind. Learn to know which are rotten thoughts and immediately turn from them to fill your basket with ripe, beautiful mind states instead. And it's so true, right? Like you would never pick up a rotten banana and eat it. You would never pick up a rotten piece of fruit and eat it. So why would you pick up a rotten thought and believe it? Instead of the rotten thoughts, go for the good thoughts. Go for the right thoughts, the thoughts that are supportive and kind, compassionate, loving, uplifting. And if they're not there, create them for yourself. It may take some effort on your part. So this is sometimes described as watching the thinker or the witness or the one who knows. So we want to pull back from the thoughts and we want to connect to the dimension of awareness. Awareness is another word for consciousness. Thoughts exist within the ocean of awareness. So the thought is like the wave, awareness is the ocean. Become less identified with the wave, become more identified with the ocean of awareness. Sometimes there will be good waves, sometimes there will be bad waves. But all waves have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you recognize that, again, you become free. You become liberated within your mind and within your heart. Last few practices to help you to deal with self-hatred. 1, focus on being of service to those that are less fortunate than you. There's always somebody out there that is suffering more than you, that needs help more than you. And very often, this is one of the most powerful ways of dissolving the pain body. is to go serve another human being. Take the attention off of ourselves, stop feeding our own ego, focus on another. Now our ego begins to dissolve, our heart begins to open up, and we tap back into that original goodness. Number 2, treat your body like a sacred temple. Very often when we are dominated by self-hatred, we don't feed ourselves well. We don't take care of ourselves. So exercise, eat good nutrition, get lots of rest. Treat yourself as if you are worthy. You are worthy of love that can be manifested through your exercise and food choices. Number 3, another practice that I would recommend is forgiveness practice. Sometimes we hate ourselves because we've acted in ways that have been harmful to another person. And in order to get beyond that, we need to forgive ourselves. We need to move beyond our own shame or guilt. Because carrying that shame and guilt is no longer of service to us or anybody else. Remember, there's 2 types of pain: the pain in the present moment and the pain in the past. Forgiveness meditation helps us to eradicate the pain of the past. I just did a meditation on forgiveness. It's episode number 77. Feel free to check that out. And then lastly, you can always work with a therapist. Working with a therapist is a great way to heal yourself of these negative emotions of self-hatred, to have a guide to help guide you through the labyrinth, which sometimes feels like a maze of misery. And over time, you will get to the other end of the maze, and then you can go and help other people get through the maze. And that's the beauty is that very often your greatest suffering becomes your greatest opportunity for awakening and serving yourself and also the rest of humanity. All right, you guys, that is it for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it with your community, share it with anybody that's struggling with self-hatred. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, leave a comment. Thank you again for tuning in. Now let's finish with the Be Ultimate prayer. May we bring strength where there is weakness. May we bring courage where there is fear. May we bring compassion where there is suffering. And may we bring light where there is darkness. May we be ultimate. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure that you click subscribe and also click the link to get those 3 amazing classes: power yoga, yin yoga, and meditation. See you next time.